Order. First thing on the agenda is our public comment. Do we have any? All right, then I will close the public comment. We have one action item this morning, and that is item 3A, approve the November 6, 2024 minutes. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion on the minutes? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next update is our state legislative update, and birthday boy Ron Pierce is here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year to everyone. So believe it or not, I can't believe it, like committee weeks really start next week, which is just crazy to think about. We're in Tallahassee next week. Actually, Brad will be coming up next week and will be joining me in Tallahassee for a day and a half for some meetings with delegation members. We have a committee week, the week of the 20th, and also we have 3 back-to-back committee weeks, the first part of February rather, and then session starts that first Tuesday in March. So I think today what we like to do, and I believe this is in your packet, is share with you what our 2025 legislative priorities are. Let me kind of set the framework here. Is when Brad and I talked over the last month and a half or so since our last meeting, one of the things we talked about was there's been a lot of discussion in Tallahassee about PSTA and its efficiency and our budget and our routes and a bunch of other different things. There's been a lot of discussion in Tallahassee as it relates to transit in general, regarding bus wraps and executive salaries and other things as well. And so what we decided this year is not to go on the offensive, but really focus on, I think, 4 different areas that we wanted to kind of share with not only members of our delegation, but House and Senate leadership and also the governor's office. And I'd kind of break it down into number 1, from an efficiency standpoint, making sure that legislators know what you all do with the limited budget you have, and more importantly, how you spend those dollars. And so that's number 1. Number 2 is talking a little bit about routes efficiency, which kind of goes back into from a budget standpoint, what we're doing. Number 3 is how we use technology to be able to truly provide services to the residents of Pinellas County. And then I think the last thing, which Brad and I kind of talked about, and this kind of came out of the hurricane, was really the impact as well on our community. What does PSTA mean to the residents of Pinellas County? So if you look at and I won't go over all of these, but I think some of the highlights are, so what we're trying to really do is share our message with the legislative delegation is, from a cost-effective transportation standpoint, here's the 5 things that we do. And number 1 is really important, by the way. So last year in the transportation package that passed, one of the things they did was cap the amount of executive salaries for transit organizations. We are literally half the statewide average. I think that's a very important talking point. Again, going back to who we are as an organization, how we're really stretching the dollar, public dollars as far as we can. So we're literally 13.3% versus 24%, which is the statewide average. That we actually reduced, taxes this year as a part of our budget. We met with Representative Bernie Jock. He was very impressed with that, and I think other members of the delegation will be as well. Talk about our partnership, our continued partnership with Uber and Lyft, and that kind of touches on the technology piece as well. And then lastly, talk about the impact and the role that we played during the recent hurricanes. I mean, that's a big number, nearly 570,000 residents that we impacted and get to safety during both of the hurricanes. So we want to make sure that our delegation and other legislative leaders kind of know that. Then share with them as well some of the new things that we're doing as a part of the budget process in 2025, some of the new services we're going to provide, and you can read the 3 there that we're going to highlight. So again, really the purpose of this year's legislative agenda is to really share with the delegation members, try to address some of the concerns that have been raised over the last year and a half. I'm proud to report, I believe there's not going to be a local bill this year impacting PSTA. I will tell you, I do believe there will be other pieces of legislation that could still impact transit organizations in Tallahassee. So we'll be definitely a part of those conversations. But from a PSTA local delegation standpoint, really our purpose is really to share with our delegation from an efficiency standpoint, from a route standpoint, from a technology standpoint, and an impact from a community standpoint. And I think these priorities that kind of share what we're doing and what we're going to do reflects that. So, Brad, anything I missed, anything that you wanted to add that's come out of our conversations that I might have missed?
The only thing, and we welcome our representative from Dunedin, perfect timing, Mr. Robert Walker, our board member, Ron, and we talked about, I think you said that you talked to some legislators that there might be some emergency relief for the hurricanes coming from Tallahassee, and that maybe PSTA could support funds for the Dunedin ferry dock, and maybe even the St. Petersburg ferry dock that got messed up by the storm.
Yes, and so Laura Bomer, by the way, so Dunedin, the city of Dunedin uses Southern Strategies as their lobbying firm. I did have a chance to talk to Laura. I think Dunedin did a workshop last week or maybe sometime early this week. Yes, the punchline was Laura and I talked about is we believe there's going to be some type of a hurricane package that's similar that came out of the Fort Myers region from a couple years ago. We believe there will be a similar hurricane package for the Tampa Bay region. We've already talked to Senator Nick DeSigley specifically about the ferry and the dock as it relates to the city of Dunedin. He thinks that would be a good fit. I know that the city's also applied to try to get some FEMA relief as well. So what we've pledged, I think, to the city is if they move forward on trying to get dollars, we are more than happy to support and have conversations with Senator DeSigley and other members of the delegation. The importance of this, well, it won't be necessarily our agenda item. We're happy to support the city of Dunedin's legislative agenda in any way we can on that specific item.
Yeah, and I told Jennifer, the city manager, that.
Yeah, and my timing was perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, no, that's great.
A lot of effort went into choreographing that this would be done exactly at 9:09 for your arrival.
Yeah, and that's great planning. I'll just quick, yeah, we did a workshop yesterday and went over our legislative priorities. And that's certainly one of my objectives is to see how we can, leverage the ongoing relief efforts to see what we can do together. And so anyway, I appreciate the update on that.
Yeah, the city manager shared with me, I guess, a damage assessment thing that the city of Dunedin had done and given to FEMA, and it was like 1.5 million, I think, for at least part of the marina.
Yeah. So yeah, we had the good news is we were able to get a assessment that will meet the FEMA requirements. So we're ahead in that regard, because we won't be waiting on FEMA to provide that assessment. So the next step, obviously, is to get into scope of services and all that kind of other stuff.
Yeah.
But and I have seen the assessment.
Okay. That was another thing, Mr. Chair, we actually, even though this was not shown on the agenda as an action item, if you'd like to have the committee endorse this prior to our trip up there where we are going to talk to the legislature, that would be good.
So you want to make a motion, a motion to approve the legislative priorities?
Unless there's any other questions
Any
or
other questions
comments.
from anybody? I think they're great.
I make the motion to accept priorities.
I got a motion and a second. I just one quick comment. I love the idea, Ron, of the positive thinking to the legislators when we're up in Tallahassee, or if we meet with any of them during the legislative processes. That this is great. I think the spread this positive news of what we've accomplished is really important moving forward. So with that, any other comments? All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We did it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would be remiss, by the way, there's one additional item which we do not need on the agenda, but Brad and I have had some conversations with I know Uber is gonna be pushing for trying to finally fix the Rule 1490, which relates to funding for transit organizations working with, the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world. Uber's taking the lead on that, which, by the way, I'm on the Uber team, so I will be very instrumental and involved in that, in those discussions. We will update you all. It doesn't need to be on our agenda, but it may be something that we may be supporting at some point, because it does impact us in our partnership with Uber. Again, we don't necessarily need it on our agenda, but I just want to make sure that you all know that may be something that we're going to be active in if Uber continues to push it in Tallahassee.
Thank you, Ron. Ron, I don't know, you may have to go somewhere else, but if you want to stick around for our discussion on the federal, our next agenda item, you might hear a little bit about Uber and our challenges on the federal side with them that may make, if they change the state rule, that might become moot because we'd be banned by the federal government, but I don't know.
Well, I'm sure Harry can fix it.
He was just saying before the meeting, he said, I think Ron might have to help us fix it.
All right, thank you, Ron. Item 5 is the federal legislative update, and Harry we have the honor of having him present here today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had to avoid the snow in Virginia and Washington, so it's nice to be down here. So thank you and Happy New Year to everybody. I always joke with Ron about this. I said, Congress is still trying to finish up their federal appropriations budget for the current year, and the state of Florida is already starting on next year's budget, so they always seem to lap us. So anyway, I had a couple slides here. I don't know if somebody's driving. So next slide.
Rachel, you want to give
Or do you have a
him
clicker?
Just-
There you go. As I mentioned, I'm sure you're all following. We have just started a new Congress. The new speaker was elected on Friday, so we have the 119th Congress is officially in session now. The President-elect Trump will be inaugurated on January 20th, so by then we'll have the full complement of new folks coming into Washington. But we still have unfinished work from the last Congress. So Congress is currently operating under what they call a continuing funding resolution until March 14th of this year. So that keeps the federal agencies open and running, and FTA and others doing their regular business. But Congress will they haven't finished any of the work on any of their 12 regular appropriations bills, so that has to be done before March 14th. And then at the same time, we have to get ready to queue up to start working on the 2026 budget, which typically starts in February. So we're already going to be 1 or 2 months behind schedule for that. The president's budget, Brad, will likely come up late this year just because of new administration, and so we probably won't see the budget request for FTA and the other Department of Transportation programs until March or maybe even April. So, but that slows down the whole process of some of the competitively driven programs that you apply for and been very successful at over the years. I don't think, Debbie, it affects any of the formula funding that you all receive. I think that pretty much goes on according to schedule. So next slide. One of the things that does impact, though, is because the regular appropriations bills are still pending, Congresswoman Castor, as you recall from our previous conversations, included $850,000 in the transportation appropriations bill for earmarked funding for PSTA for your 34th Street corridor improvement project. So we don't have any reason to believe that funding won't be in the final appropriations bill. But with any new Congress, you have to reintroduce all the legislation has to be reintroduced in the new Congress. So they'll have to reintroduce each of these transportation or each of these appropriations bills. And we'll just continue to make sure that there's not a problem with the funding here. Brad was just up in Washington in December and met with Congresswoman Castor and her staff to thank her for, I think we were one of the first visitors to in her office, Brad, to thank her for her support of the request. Met with Congresswoman Luna and talked about some of your programs there, and we also talked to some of the committee staff about some issues that are of interest to you. So Brad's already working ahead for the new Congress when he was up there in December. Next slide. Brad just asked me to give you, and I'm sure you're all following, this is the political science lesson of what's going on and why this new Congress is going to be very challenging. As you know, the Republicans are now in control of the Senate, so it's going to be some time to figure out the new Republican leadership in the Senate, what their position is on issues like transit, public transit. The Republicans will have a 53 to 47 seat majority. As you also know, we're going to be losing Senator Rubio is likely to be confirmed on Inauguration Day as Secretary of State, so that will trigger the governor having to appoint a new senator. So don't know who that will be yet, and there'll be some opportunity to educate him or her on transit and why it's important to PSTA and to the state of Florida, so we'll have some work to do there. As you know, the House is a little trickier after the election. Republicans still control the House at 220 to 215, but Congressman Gates chose not to be sworn into this Congress, so that takes the majority down to 219 to 215. And as you saw last Friday when they went to elect a speaker, that's a very challenging, thin margin. Two of the House members are going to be leaving to go into the administration, so that'll further reduce the majority down to 217 to 215. So it's actually a one-seat working majority. So it's going to be very tricky for the first 90 to 100 days. I think the Florida special election to replace Congressman Gates and then Congressman Waltz is leaving to go in the administration will be, the new members will be sworn in sometime in the first week in April. So for the first 3.5 months of the new Congress, it'll be a 217 and 215 majority. So next slide, just a little trivia here. This is the first time since the 88th Congress, which is when Congress expanded to the current 435 members in the House, where there's actually been a larger majority of either party in the Senate than the House. So that just gives you an idea how narrow and how challenging it's going to be for the House to work through. So next slide. So some new opportunities, Brad, we talked about some of these things. Much of the leadership of the House Transportation Committee will stay the same. Sam Graves from Missouri will continue to be the chairman. I think Rick Crawford from Arkansas will continue to be the chairman of the subcommittee on highways and transit. Rick Larson from the state of Washington will be the ranking Republican. Brad and I had a good meeting with his staff when he was up in December. Rick Larson is actually one of the champions in Congress for ferry boat funding, so the ferry boat grant program. And so he's bound and determined to keep that funding in the new Congress and new administration. That may be helpful to some ideas that PSTA has on ferry service. In the Senate, it'll be a little different. It's odd that in the Senate, transit program is actually administered by the Senate Banking Committee. The House, it's in the Transportation Committee, so it's a little disconnect. But Tim Scott from South Carolina will be the new chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, and Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts will be the ranking Democrat. We don't have a lot of information on just where they stand on transit issues, but I'm sure when you come up for APTA later this winter that they will be a priority to try and get them over to talk to you and see what they're interested in. Next slide. As you know, new administration means we'll have new cabinet members. Sean Duffy, a former congressman from Wisconsin, has been nominated to be the Secretary of Transportation. His confirmation hearing is actually a week from today, so they expect him to be confirmed pretty quickly. He was really not very active. He was more active in financial services issues. Cannabis legalization was a big issue for him. Not really very active on transportation issues, so he's kind of a blank slate. Brad and I talked this morning before the meeting started about trying to get up and talk to some of his folks. His former chief of staff in Congress is actually a Floridian, so and he may be going over to support him in his new job as secretary, so that may be good in for Florida and for us, Brad, on some of the issues. No word yet on any ideas, not even any conversation about who the new FTA administrator will be. That's a politically appointed position too. Typically, they wait until the secretary is confirmed to pick some of those folks. Brad, there was some conversation about Jane Williams maybe coming back to that position. She was the acting FTA administrator during the Trump administration. I don't think he ever had one confirmed in his 4 years of office the first time around. So we'll have to do some, I think, work with whoever the new person is there.
In December, she told me, she said she could confirm nor deny.
That's right. She's also a big Phillies fan, so she likes Clearwater. So
Yeah,
I know
she
Mr. Longstrap have a good friendship with her. So it would not be hard to get her down to Clearwater maybe to do a groundbreaking or something. Next slide. So some of the current issues that we continue to work on, and in the appropriations bill that's pending, there continues to be funding for the ferry boat and infrastructure program. It's a combination of regularly appropriated funds and then extra funds that were provided in the bipartisan infrastructure bill in 2021. So there's currently pending in the appropriations bill $83 million, which is significantly more, Brad. I think at one point we were down to $35 million a year for this program. So there's money to be competed for in 25 for ferry boats and infrastructure. I know that's an interest to you. And there continues to be $50 million for what was a new program for electric ferry boats to transition over from diesel to electric. So that funding is still out there. Goal is to make sure it stays in the final bill in March. And then the other issue that Brad and we talked about when he was up in December was the FTA actually requested Congress provide $57 million in supplemental funding for transit agencies related to natural disasters all over the country, not just in Florida. And this goes back to 2023, so all the storms in the last 2 years, many transit agencies like PSTA provided yeoman-like work in support of those storms. In fact, in their sheet here, you see that there was $57 million requested by the Federal Transit Administration for hurricane relief for transit agencies, almost $13 million of that for Florida. The largest request was for the city of New York, for almost $13 million. The second largest request in the country was for PSTA at $7 million. So total, your total request was what, Brad, almost $9 million for to reimburse you for operating expenses related to the storms. Brad did a really good job when he was up in December talking about how these services you provided were so critical to evacuating people to emergency shelters, bringing them back home after the storms, taking them back for the next storm, bringing them back, but also continuing to provide service to folks during the recovery period, and even to provide service to get to the FEMA disaster assistance offices. So it was a good story, heard a lot of good remarks. Unfortunately, the supplemental appropriations bill that Congress approved in December did not include the FTA request for funding. And so one of the things Brad and I were talking about this morning was trying to come up here in February and trying to advocate a little bit more for that. The committee wants to hear from more people about why this money is so important. So I think maybe, Brad, if we give us some of the New York folks and maybe some of the Florida folks, we could create a little coalition to try and get that money in the final bill, which I think would help Debbie in your financial picture a little bit. So we'll continue to work on that in this new year.
You said there's 13 million in Florida?
12.8 million for Florida, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, I heard that there, yeah.
So, next slide. And then I think, Brad, you're going to talk a little bit more. I'll just pass on that for now, but we've talked, I think, a couple times about the FTA, the so-called taxi cab exemption, which allows you to use Uber and Lyft services for some of your senior and your disabled population. It's been a great service, but some new guidance that's been coming out from FTA could jeopardize the future of those services. There was a Federal Register notice published on December 30th that asked for public comment on revising the so-called taxi cab exemption. And Brad's going to talk about it, this requires drug and alcohol testing for drivers, just like all of your employees are drug tested. The rules would evolve and require Uber and Lyft drivers, I presume, Brad, to be drug tested, or they couldn't participate in your services. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then just looking ahead, big picture for this next Congress, as you know, in 2021, Congress passed a bipartisan infrastructure law that reauthorized the federal highway and transit programs for 5 years. That authorization will expire at the end of next year in 2026. So during this Congress will come back and start looking at what they want to do with the federal transit programs, particularly all the highway programs. In 2021, it was a big boost with the Biden administration and all the extra funding that were provided for those programs. We'll have to see what the new administration wants to do. Remember, if you recall, the first Trump administration was really focused on infrastructure. It was they wanted to do some things. They weren't quite as successful, but they tried. So we don't know where they're going to go with that. So something to keep an eye on. The bipartisan infrastructure bill was passed in 2021. Provided for 5 years of enhanced funding for a variety of programs like the RAISE grant, which is where you're building the Clearwater Transit Center, and the CIG programs that you get some funding from. The Low-No Bus program was enhanced by extra funding in that bill. So there are 2 more rounds of funding, Brad, for all those enhanced infrastructure programs were created in 2021. And so 2 more opportunities to compete for those. There was an interesting report, Brad, just came out this week. There's been talk this administration wanted to go back and claw back or take back some funding from the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act to pay for the tax reform bill. They're going to have to pass on some other things. There was a report out that says that they can't go back and claw back any of the bipartisan infrastructure law because of the way the legislation was written. They declared all that money emergency funding, and so you can't claw back emergency funding. So for the next 2 rounds of infrastructure funding are protected, so that's good news, Brad, for transit programs. And then finally, we got to continue to work. As you know, the Trump administration is creating this DOGE commission that's going to be looking at all types of federal spending and trying to evaluate where they can reduce spending throughout the government, and that includes the Department of Transportation. So it'll be important to watch those commission. I'm sure AFTA's going to engage with them, Brad, to talk about why transit is important to the country. We need to continue to work on that. Congress has created a DOGE subcommittee under its Government Oversight Committee, so they're going to be trying to provide some legislative backup to what Elon Musk is working on. So it's something we need to continue to look at, work with, and make sure we continue to update our congressional delegation on why transit's important here in the Tampa Bay area, but throughout the state. With that, Brad, I know you want to talk some more about the taxi cab exemption, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? Yes, go ahead. Yes, Gina.
Thank you, and I apologize for being late this morning. There's a terrible accident just where I get onto I-275 where a car had flipped over, and I just pray that everyone's okay, and I'm glad that I was able to get here safely. But thank you so much for this update. This is really good information as we start to plan our year of advocacy. Regarding the public comment on the taxi cab exemption, will there be public comment submitted officially by PSTA? Do you encourage, is it helpful if each of us individually submits public comment? And if so, could you and your team provide talking points for us to use to craft our own messaging?
Stay tuned for the next presentation I'm about to make on that exact topic, but the short answer is yes, yes, and yes. Do all the things. At
Okay,
least those are all planned
great.
activities, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think as much public comment as you can get in is important, because it's not, I mean, we talked about this, it's
Right.
not it's kind of the impact of this spread somewhat limited. I mean, the communities are doing things like you're doing. It's not every community in America is gonna be impacted by this spread that doesn't use Uber and Lyft to the same extent that you do, and so anything you can do, maybe even going so far, I don't know, Brad, it's like some of the AARP or some of the folks for seniors are using this service, maybe getting some community groups to weigh in that this is an important service and we don't want to
Right.
lose this service, and, it's, anything, I think,
And what about?
more voices, the better.
Public comment from people from Uber and Lyft as well?
Yeah, for sure.
Those partners, make sure they're talking. What about the Florida League of Cities, Chair?
I don't believe they've ever, when I was at the legislative conference, they didn't bring this up.
I wonder how many other Florida
There's not many
transit
others
systems
in
are
Florida.
using this?
There's not many other cities that are really utilizing Uber very much, to my knowledge, in Florida. But there are, around the whole country, there's over 100 supposedly.
Okay, I can bring it up with National League of Cities too.
There's
and
some
then-
veterans use your service, I believe, correct? I mean, veterans are using your Uber and Lyft services, is correct?
They are?
I mean, maybe even, to your point, maybe even a veterans organization that would weigh in, I mean, different voices, I think, would amplify the problem.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to just go ahead and give my presentation? on
Yeah,
that topic?
yeah, because
I have a quick.
oh, go
Yeah.
ahead.
What is the name of the commission again that you
The
said?
DOGE Commission,
DO,
DOGE, what's it stand for?
Department of Government
It's-
Efficiency.
Yeah, Department of Government Efficiency. It's a, how would I explain this? It's not an official government sanctioned agency. It's something that President Trump created and appointed Elon Musk to chair.
Vinny.
Yeah, and Vivek, but they're creating parallel now legislative committees within Congress to sort of track the recommendations of the DOGE Commission. So they expect to have a report out, I think, in June, and make some recommendations on places where they can reduce spending, and they're trying to reduce the size of the federal workforce and other things. So it's something worth paying attention to for all fronts, not just transit, because they're gonna make some recommendations, and Congress is, I'm sure, gonna follow some of them, so.
Or do we have any other questions for Harry? All right, then we're gonna move on to item 5A, and that is, Brad, your
Yeah.
presentation, please.
And this, I added this to the agenda. It's late breaking news because the FTA just came out with these rules. Well, they first published them on Christmas Eve, and then they put them in the Federal Register on December 30th, so just a week ago. They essentially threatened all of our programs related to a law that was passed in 1991 requiring public transit operators to be drug tested. I don't know how many folks were around back in 1991, or here's my little slide. Remember the First Lady Nancy Reagan's war on drugs in the 1980s turned into a bill that was passed, a law that was passed in 1991 requiring all commercial drivers to be drug tested. And that got all implemented in the 90s. And then in 2001, a lot of transit systems were using taxi cabs back then for paratransit and other uses. When I got started in my career, we did a taxi cab program for our commuter rail riders, and they gave an exemption because taxi cab drivers are not usually drug tested. They were not subject because they just drive cars. But when you go to the airport and you get into a cab, they weren't drug tested. And since the way a taxi system works is they are independent contractors who lease the cars from the company, and then only a handful of them maybe do transit rides, and the rest of them take people from the airport. FTA created an exemption from the drug testing requirements for taxi drivers in 2001. They said as long as the customer chooses the taxi cab. So they're not forced to take a non-drug tested mode. That's their choice. That is what the regulations said back in 2001 to now. In 2016, Uber, I think, was patented in 2013. PSTA was the first transit system in the United States to have a contract with Uber. This is brand new. In 2016, we started our first program with Uber. We were talking earlier, of course, I don't know if you remember back then, at first there was a lot of controversy about Uber taking over taxi cabs, and Hillsborough County had a commission that banned Uber for a while, and there was that whole time period. The state, Ron Pierce knows, the state legislature worked on that for a couple of years before they finally came around to approving of Uber and Lyft usage across the state of Florida. The federal government has never really weighed in on it. But in 2016, the FTA issued a regulation that said the taxi cab exemption from 2001, that applied to Uber and Lyft, to TNCs as well. They said as long as you give the customer a choice, it's the customer who chooses to do that. They don't have to. They do not need to be drug tested. And I don't know if you know, but Uber and Lyft drivers are not employees of Uber and Lyft. They are independent contractors, kind of like cabs, and they anybody can be an Uber or Lyft driver. Maybe some of you have been an Uber or Lyft driver. You can just log on to the app. They're not drug tested. They just log on. They can be sitting on the couch and be bored with whatever's on TV, and they just go out and ride an Uber for an hour, and then they go back home. There's no set hours. There's nothing. And then our rides that we provide, sometimes they're provided by people from Tallahassee. A driver from Tallahassee may take someone down to Tampa, and then, there's a job available in Pinellas. I'll go help them out. They're not necessarily locally based even. It's a completely different setup, and it's very hard for that kind of setup to drug test their drivers, right? I mean, Uber has fought testing their drivers everywhere in the country. There's been cities that have asked for that, and they've not willingly been able to do that. They say they have tried it. They tried it in New York City and other places, and loses the magic because so many people just don't want to bother with that. You know, so many people out in the community, the number of drivers goes way down, and then the Uber doesn't really work. On December 30th, FTA published a complete rewriting of the taxi cab exemption. And they claimed they made a mistake, which it's hard to believe that they made a mistake in the way they wrote their, and rewrote it in 2016 by saying that as long as you had multiple contracts and give the customer choice, they said that was all a mistake. And that now they do not allow their proposed rule that would not allow PSTA to have a contract with any entity that did not drug test their employees. Drug test their drivers. They're not employees. Which means we wouldn't even be able to have a contract with Uber or Lyft as written. And their argument is, look, Congress passed this law that said that every transit bus driver or train driver or ferry driver or paratransit driver needs to be tested for drugs. And this is a loophole that a lot of transit systems, including PSDA, have figured out so that these riders are riding in Uber cars that are not drug tested. And this is unsafe. So, and they feel like this is also a violation of the federal law that they as the FTA have to uphold. So there is this February 13th deadline for the comments on their proposed new rule. But I presented this to the legislative committee of PSDA when this first came up almost a year ago. And Harry and I have been up there talking to them, and we've had Bonnie, who's our director of mobility, she and I have been on endless numbers of Zoom calls with other transit systems who are doing this, and we're part of a consortium. We had Zoom calls with the FTA about this, and I thought this fall that maybe we had, it was complex to them. It is that whole complex issue that a lot of people don't know about. They had to learn about it, and I felt like we had made some progress. But then Christmas, they came out with this thing like, nope, you guys are done. I think getting a bunch of citizens, I thought about anything we can do. Okay. It seems like the road has ended with the Federal Transit Administration, with the Department of Transportation. They have decided, unless Congress changes the law on drug testing in some way, they don't think we can operate our programs. Continuing PSDA's Mobility on Demand program, which is growing like gangbusters, incredibly popular, might be impossible. Just an example, in August of 2024, we carried 16,000 rides on Uber. The rest of the vast majority of our paratransit was 9,000. It was 9,000. People, once they try out Uber and Lyft, they love it, and they never go back to transit. Why? Because if you take an Uber Lyft, it comes in 5 minutes. Transit, you have to call the day before. And people don't want that. They want the flexibility of a ride whenever they want it. And I think those who have been on the board know we've talked about this a while. It's incredibly successful. And what worries me is if we have to shut it down, the boardroom down there is going to be packed. You're going to be the chair, and there's going to be 100, 200 little old ladies all mad at us, yelling at us. And it's nothing that we did. It is a mistake. And I think the federal government knows that they're letting us blame them by calling it a mistake. They want us to blame them. So, as Harry and I were talking just before the meeting, We do think we need a multi-pronged approach to this, and really our audience for commenting is Congress, is the congressional delegation and other members of Congress from around the country, especially ones that maybe and also engaging Uber. It seems like to me that this is almost a battle that we can't really even fight. It really needs to be Uber and Lyft. Need to work to help with this. This is a major business line for them around the country. Last week, Uber was on one of the Zoom calls, and they said that they had just seen this too, and they are evaluating what they want to do. They left all options on the table, including shutting down or canceling all their contracts with over 100 cities across the country that do this. Is one option. Another option that they said was maybe trying to negotiate some kind of deal with the DOT, which I don't know if that would work, but maybe they're powerful enough that they could do that, where they could do some kind of drug testing on a limited basis somehow. And then the third option, they said, well, they could create a separate business unit that for their largest customers, which I think PSA is one of their largest customers, where they would do the drug testing. But even that there's a lot of questions of how that would work, because again, the problem is that just random drivers in Pinellas County may not want to do that, and they won't sign up for Uber. And then it's not beneficial. The other thing I worry about is the rule does not say we cannot provide same-day, real-time Uber-like service. It just says that we cannot provide it with non-drug tested drivers. They have to be drug tested. So we could spend a lot of money on creating kind of our own system. I could make Bonnie buy 200 cars and hire 200 drivers, and they could drive around picking up people and Trish already has the drug testing thing set up for all of our bus drivers. We could set all that up. That would cost a lot of money. So this is really just a money thing in some places. So I want to be a little bit hesitant to the public and others to say that there's nothing we can do. We could, but I just don't see it being viable. It would be such an expense compared to what it costs for Uber. You know, Uber, people use their own car, so that is an incredible savings versus PSDA either contracting with a whole fleet of cars or employees. For example, this 16,000 rides a month in 2024. I looked this up right before the meeting. It cost $5 million last year in the PSA budget. The Uber and Lyft was $5 million. The Transdev 9,000 cost $9 million. That was $9 million for Transdev rides, about a little bit less, a little bit more than half, but it was $9 million versus $5. If we were to shut down, when we might have to shut down Uber and Lyft, a lot of those rides are going to go to Transdev. People won't have any other option. This is going to cost PSA just more money. You know, even if we totally shut it down, it's going to really increase the cost of PSDA. So I don't know if we have a perfect solution to this, but certainly I think the audience really is Congress, just seeing if they can weigh in on this and direct the federal agency that they are okay with Uber or not okay. I mean, some suggestions have been, could the rider sign some kind of like waiver or, idea? The feds have not been really open to that, but they could sign, waiving their liability. Are there any questions? I mean, I have a lot of questions myself, but.
David, go ahead.
Yeah, that waiver of liability, I don't think would hold up in court if they, you know, if they tried to do that. So I think what you got your strategy here is to get the riders, you know, to, I mean, maybe a meeting with all the old ladies and send that up to Washington and say, look, what's, you know, what it's causing here, because it's a successful program we have. And they've got to know that it's working for us at least.
Yeah. We've talked about how we could get 1,000 old ladies up to DC into the office. How can we be impactful in some way on this?
But Brad, you're required to provide these paratransit services, correct? I mean, that's a requirement for PSTA? I mean,
Yes.
Yeah, so,
We're required to provide a complimentary paratransit. We're not required to provide same-day or real-time rides, which is what the customer wants. So,
Janie, you have a question?
Were you finished? Okay, first of all, in one slide, in the initial slide, where you had the timeline of the
Yeah.
FTA's decisions, it said, well.
this is my first line.
So
February
that
13th
one
is the
says,
deadline.
so that one says, no contracts can be signed with private sector service providers that don't drug test their drivers. Now, a couple slides later, if you go forward to this one, it says
Oh, it's
service
in- I
providers
meant,
that do not drug test their employees. Do you happen to know offhand, or do you have easy access to the actual language that they put forward?
Yes.
Because employees and drivers are two different things.
It's drivers. It's
Okay.
drivers. They went so far, and I can share with the committee the detailed language that they have. They do not want any loophole on this, so that's why they said you
Well-
cannot execute a contract with a
Yeah.
TNC.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I just
Um,
wanted to make sure, because there's a difference between employees.
Yeah, and that was my mistake, putting employees there. I meant, it's for any driver.
And then at the bottom there, it says, Uber states they're evaluating their options. What does that mean? What are their options?
Well, like I said, I mean, I think Trish, you could chime in because you heard them. They shutting down, negotiating some kind of compromise deal, which I don't know if they can do, or maybe doing something they've never been willing to do, which is set up a drug testing program for their drivers. Trying to comply
Yeah.
and compete.
Okay,
So
and
it's like
then,
they're open to anything.
do you have numbers on the rides that are, the transportation that's provided to and from Bay Pines? Do you have like destination-specific data so that we can get an estimate, even if it's a ballpark, on how many of these rides are specifically provided for veterans?
Yeah, we do have that data. I haven't looked at that before, but definitely we can.
In our messaging, especially with some members of our congressional delegation, being able to say, almost half of, or
Yeah.
approximately half of these rides are provided for veterans.
Yeah.
That message could go a long way. And then I think in addition to the letters, if you guys have time, instead of sending 1,000 little old ladies to Washington, if you could do a video with really short interviews of people who are currently benefiting from this program who could say what it does for them and/or what would happen if it went away. So being able to, the letters are great, but if you have a video that shows, you know, a couple of seniors and then, you know, a veteran sitting at Bay Pines with the American flag behind them and their World War II hat on, you know, anything like that, saying, this helps me, what they're proposing will hurt me. Those can be impactful. And so I hope that you will consider getting your team to put something together. It can, you know, it can be 2 minutes total. But
I mean,
having something like that
One way to get that done
send-
pretty effectively would be to get an article in the Tampa Bay Times, which might be after today, about this, and then they'll come to the meeting, and then they'll have 3 minutes, and we do video that. And then they will be at the podium and complaining to you guys, and we'll just video that and send that to our congressional delegation.
Yeah, I think a video to,
I do too.
that is
I think
sent
that's
to
good.
go along with the letters would be
Yeah.
helpful. That's all I have, thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, and Happy New Year to everyone that I haven't spoken to so far in 2025. So I'm going to step out of one hat and go to the other, because one of those little old ladies is my mom, who during her chemo treatment relied on some of these rides. And it would give me great comfort to know that her driver is transporting her safely to and from where she is going. So I understand the financial impact that we're trying not to incur, but if I'm listening to the communication of what I'm hearing, we're gonna have to spend money either way. So I'm looking at trying to be, as far as a marketing tool is concerned, we have the safest program out there because we drug test our drivers, or because we ensure the safety of our riders. That's a pro in some people's eyes,
Oh, right, yeah.
in some perspectives. So it's not a total loss that we're putting an extra effort in ensuring that anything that has the PSTA stamp on it is not providing the best service and the safest service that we have. And considering that we're in the state of Florida, that no longer does the Florida vehicle inspections anymore, you're right. They utilize their own vehicles. They utilize their own automobiles. There are different things that I think that we should look at and could look at when it comes down to providing the safety of our riders. And when we say our seniors, to me, that's a priceless commodity that our society should hold near and dear, and not just a dollar sign in regards to that. So that's my 2 cents on that. In regards to the price tag, PSTA has been phenomenal in being creative, providing free rides to veterans and, those type of things. I would hope that we would take a proactive step in looking at what a cost could be just in case. Plan A, Plan B, Plan B, Plan C, because if I'm hearing you correctly, we're gonna have to spend money either way. So let's do it where it's impactful, where it's efficient, and where we're having that positive conversation. If this happens, this is how we will benefit from it. We can do a whole campaign of why it would impact some of our seniors. I'm for that as well, but I still also want us to focus on how we can add an extra layer of safety to our riders in that conversation. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
That's something that we have been trying to calculate. There's no evidence, Bonnie, correct me if I'm wrong, that our mobility on demand program has a worse safety record or a greater accident record than the drug tested equivalent Transdev. Now, we're not sure we get all the information from Uber. I mean, we don't get any information from the Uber company about accidents. We hear from customers if they've had a problem. But Uber has to provide that data, and I think that is essential, that they show that they are a safe mode of travel, to, if we have any chance of keeping this going, yeah. Yeah.
All right. Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, so, I really like that idea of a positive promotional campaign that talks about the service that PSTA provides, while at the same time providing a safe experience through an implemented drug testing program, or whatever we want to call it. I think that is absolutely the right first step. And the reason I say that is because kind of taking a little bit of well, it's not a contrarian view, but if I were Uber, I would not be too thrilled about giving up contracts in 100 different cities. I have to think this is a very lucrative business for them. And I think, to your point, Brad, I absolutely agree that the draft language at this point is intended to make the transit authorities concerned and to blame the federal government. I can see how this will work, because basically I think the objective here is, again, PSTA, the transit authorities, we are the customer to what Uber provides. And subsequently, I think there's a measure of pressure that we need to put on them, because I'm really kind of surprised that the TNCs don't already have this in place. And I use my own example. I'm a licensed captain, and I have to register with the Federal Transit Authority, and I have to be drug tested. And, to me, that's a no-brainer. I don't understand, and unfortunately, this is putting us in a position that subsequently, it is going to be challenging for us to address, because, and I love the veteran thread. I think that is another aspect of this campaign, and I think that, but I think at this point we take the more positive approach, saying, and this is an opportunity to say, this is what we provide, and Uber, Lyft, essentially you need to fall in line with all the other companies that are providing federal services, or in our case, regional services.
All right. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I have just one comment. Our number 4 priority is we are number 1 customer of Uber and Lyft in the state. And I really feel that the deadline of April 15th, or February, is there any way in here we can extend it? That sounds like it's too quick.
It is.
It's ridiculous.
Well, what the federal, Harry maybe can articulate this better, but this is not subject, they really didn't even have to allow us to have any comment. This is just their own regulation, that somehow they have the authority to change whenever they want. But they did open up a public comment period of like a month, to be nice, because I think they knew this was a big impact. But I don't know.
Typically, they give 45 days for public comment. I mean, that's typical, but they can, you can ask and they can extend the public comment period. That happens all the time. And just one thing, Brett, so this is we talked earlier about change in administration, change new Congress and all that. So this is a set of these are proposed rules that were published by the current administration. So there'll be a new administration coming in with new leadership at the Department of Transportation. They don't, just because they're taking comments doesn't mean they have to go to the final rules. They can just sit on this and not do anything. There are lots of examples of rules that were published, proposed rules, that never get finalized. They just die on the vine. And that happens oftentimes, and this administration is going to go back to fewer rules, fewer regulations, unwinding some of the ones from the previous administration. So I think one of the things Brad and I talked about is trying to get to explain what the impact of these proposed rules are to the new leadership of the Department of Transportation, Secretary Duffy and others when they come in the office. And so I don't, it doesn't mean that they're gonna go immediately to final rules. So, I mean, they could, and you gotta be ready for that, but it doesn't mean that that's necessarily the next step. So the comments are important. You could ask for an extension. That could be something that somebody asked for, Brad, or even APTA could ask for an extension just to allow for more, because it came out, was published during the holidays, and, let's ask for another 45 days or whatever, that would help. But that'd give you more time, I think, to talk to the administration. And that doesn't mean the proposed rules are what the final rules will be. They can amend them,
They could change.
So, I mean, there are a lot of options here to address this.
Yes, you have a comment?
Thank you, Chair. I just also wanted to be sure that we enter into the record for this conversation that it is clearly already against the law to operate any type of machinery under the influence of anything. So we are, I just wanted to be sure anyone watching this not be under the wrong impression that we support less than safe measures by any means. But it's, no one can get behind the wheel of any vehicle under the influence of
Absolutely.
alcohol or
Yep.
other substances. Thank you.
Sorry, back here.
You wanna have a comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. And our TransDev requires all of their drivers to be tested already.
Yes. Yeah. And then we also contract with the United Taxi, and they, in order for them to provide a PSTA ride, they have to be in a pool of drug-tested drivers. Not all taxi drivers for United Taxi, if they just want to go to the airport, they don't have to be drug tested. But if they want to provide rides in Pinellas for PSTA, then they have to be drug tested.
Bonnie, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know that when we're talking about not just paratransit, but all of our programs, riders always have a choice of provider. So if a rider is in our 88 paratransit program, they can choose traditional access. They'll always get a drug and alcohol tested provider. If they want that on-demand experience, they can choose between the taxi, Uber, and Lyft. And when we talk to customers when they first enroll in the program, and anytime they have questions, we let them know, like, hey, with an Uber, this is what you're gonna get. You know, it's gonna pull up to the curb, the driver's not gonna come out and help you. And even if they don't understand that when we tell them, the first time they get a ride, they experience that. And they're still choosing Uber and Lyft. So I really think our customers, they understand what they're getting and they still are choosing Uber and Lyft. And that's not just with the paratransit program, but like Brad was mentioning, TD Late Shift. Riders know what they're getting into, either from riding or an explanation from us, and they're still choosing those providers.
Perfect, thank you for that. So I think we should definitely bring this up next legislative meeting with an update of what happens, because we're running out of time here. So would that be okay with the board? We all agree we'll bring this up at the next meeting, and Harry and Brad, you just keep us updated.
Yeah.
On how we can help.
I think we have our next legislative committee meeting is, what day? It's before the 13th, right?
It's the 12th.
Oh, it's the 12th. Well, we'll share with you our comments and videos or our outreach efforts then.
Okay, so then we're gonna move on to 5B, which is a draft 2025 federal legislative priorities. Oh, we already did that. Yes, we did. Yeah, we're done. All right, and it's 6, other business. Anybody have any comments on other business? All right, then item 7 is adjournment. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chair.
Great meeting.
Happy
Good to
New
see
Year.
you in person.
How are you?
Good. I was hoping you were here and not
There was a lot of good
stuck up in
comments on
the,
this.